Welcome, everyone, to the Media Row podcast. I'm Justin Miller. It is game day. Ohio State, Texas tonight. I can't wait for this one. Winner advances to play Notre Dame in the championship come January 20th. You could have Marcus Freeman going up against his former team. I can't wait. Should be really good. We'll break down that game, but we have a lot to get to. It's been a fun week, and I appreciate everyone sticking around, liking, subscribing, commenting on all of our platforms. So really appreciate that. None of this would be possible without you, the listener, the viewer. Means the world. So really appreciate that. Monday through Friday, we'll be here with you. So usually around 2 o'clock, we get this posted and out on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, as well as YouTube, where you can watch it. Downloads have been going well early on, so really happy about that. Some cool news coming up that I'm excited to get to, but just a huge thank you. Make sure to follow us at Media Row Pod on Twitter, as well as you can follow me on Twitter at Justin_C Miller, as well as TikTok at Justin Miller on air. Let's just jump into it. I know today is going to be more of a NFL college football playoff heavy show, but as this is a podcast that has been more on Drake, the Missouri Valley, as well as top other sports stories, a few things we need to get to with the Drake Bulldogs first before we break down some football here. Starting off with the game tonight. The Drake women head to Peoria to face the Bradley Braves, a Braves team that is hard to beat at home. 5-1 at home, and a team that has really changed over the year. A team that has really progressed, and a team that only won 6 games a season ago and have won 5 games now at home. They're going to be a challenge. The thing with most Valley teams that Drake has an advantage of is just Drake's ability to have balance on the offensive end. It doesn't just come down to one person. And while Bradley has a few talented offensive players, the ball really goes through their guard and Barnes. Barnes puts up about 15 points a game. She is the only player for Bradley that averages over 10 points. And it is just, it's what Drake is able to do with players like Becker, who has over 10 points a game, Anna Miller, who is really good. And then, of course, you have Katie Dinnebeer, who's putting up 20 points a game. And that backcourt matchup will be fun. Katie Dinnebeer's defense has kind of been overlooked this season with her ability on the offensive end. She's getting praised for Player of the Week. It feels like every week at this point. It's been 4 straight Missouri Valley Conference Player of the Week's awards for Katie Dinnebeer, and she made history by only being the 5th Missouri Valley Conference woman to score 30-plus in 5 games in a season, joining only one other Drake Bulldog. And while her offense is incredible, it's her defense that I love watching. And she is going to cause issues for Barnes tonight, I believe. And I think Drake escapes this because all Drake needs to do is just continue to play their game and continue to move the ball. They have been incredible in terms of just playing team basketball. And you watch this team, and it's so easy to cheer for because it doesn't just go through one person. It could be anyone's night. Ava Hawthorne off the bench has had great games. Courtney Becker had a career game a few weeks ago. And they're a team that has depth. They're a team that has fun while they play. And they're a team that just moves the basketball. 20 assists in the last 4 games. Over 20 assists in the last 4 games. And they're a team that they're going to beat you in that style of you're going to have to play some really fundamentally sound defense or Drake's going to burn you. And the other thing Drake needs to do tonight, outside of just continue to play fundamentally sound basketball with moving the ball around, get it to different kind of playmakers, don't have the ball just come through one player, is get off onto a fast break. The defense has been really good from Dinnebeer, like I said. Courtney Becker, though, has been a menace on the glass, and she can start full court breaks, and it is just going to be a fun game to watch. I do think Drake handles Bradley, a team, though, that if you're a Braves fan, you can't be too upset. Like I said, you won 6 games last year. Now you've definitely beaten that mark, and it's been a fun team to watch. And this is a team that's going to continue to grow. So I think Drake handles it just because of their depth and the way they move the ball. And that's going to be true about a lot of games. And Drake right now 3-0 in the Missouri Valley Conference. You have UNI as well in conference play. That's fun. The Missouri Valley's coming through Iowa right now. And so can't wait for that game. I think the women play in February, early part of February, where they'll take on UNI. So as long as both teams keep winning, that is setting up to be a prime matchup of UNI and Drake. So the Drake women, they look to win 8 straight against Bradley on the road tonight at 6 o'clock. I'm sure you can watch that on ESPN+, as well as listen to our buddy Hunter Phillips on the call, who will be calling his 300th game. Congratulations to Hunter. Hunter has been a huge mentor to me throughout my time, and when I was a student, just like I was with Admire, annoyed him constantly, trying to pick his brain. But I really related well with Hunter because at Drake, you have the Drake broadcasting system, which is the student broadcast. That's where he got his start as well. He did that, and then it was just great timing after he graduated. Drake needed a women's basketball play-by-play voice. He took it, and he's ran with it. And he's been incredible. And it's just, as someone who, in a way, is following in his footsteps, it is very fun to watch. And he's great at it. And you can listen to him not only do Drake games, but in the summer, I know he does the softball state championship games. He also does some football games throughout the season for the high school teams here in Iowa. So Hunter Phillips calling his 300th game for Drake. Very exciting. Wish it was in the Knapp Center, just so that, I think it'd be cool if Drake put a video up or something. But maybe they will when Drake comes back home. Drake, the women, they go to Illinois State on Sunday. So they get, of course, that day off, and then they're still on the road. So 2 straight road games. Drake trying to win their 8th in a row. I think they do. I think Pullman's a great coach, and I think this team just has too many weapons. Continuing talking about Drake men's basketball and just the Bulldogs in general, the Drake men's basketball team takes on Evansville tomorrow, and this is an Evansville team that a lot of people joke about. They had some struggles. They've won 3 of their last 4 by 10-plus points. So I don't think Drake's going to be thinking they can just walk over this team. Plus, they haven't been able to really walk over a team in a long time. And I'm just hoping there's no hangover. And I don't think there will be. No hangover after an emotional win against Bradley on the road. You get back into the win column. I think because those 2 straight losses in a row, that changed the mentality of this team. And you saw it against Bradley. And I think against Evansville, I don't think they blow out the Aces. But if they do, that is just going to be huge confidence-wise to kind of give fans and the players just this sense of, okay, we know what we can do. When we're at our best, we're on top of the conference. And so I don't expect a hangover, but that's one big thing I'm worried about. I don't expect it, though. The Aces, 1-6 on the road, haven't been great. Valley teams, though, like we've mentioned, have been playing well on the road. They won 3 of their last 4 by 10-plus points. Would love to see if Coach McCollum continues this rotation, though, of Howard coming in, of getting Banks more time, filling in for Maniau, and just seeing if he can start to balance out these playing minutes for guys like Muscari and Sturts. And then see where Isaiah Jackson's at health-wise, because Isaiah Jackson right now didn't play a lot in that Bradley game, didn't really do much, but I know he's been dealing with a nagging injury these past few weeks is what Coach told me. And so it will be interesting to see the rotations. I think that's going to be the main thing I'm watching tomorrow is how we balance out the minutes, because that is, again, still why I think most people are concerned about just the longevity of the season. And now you're playing 2 games a week. You don't get long breaks in between those games. I mean, Drake, they're getting 3 days off, 2 days off, and then they play on Saturday against Evansville. You have travel involved. So when you have guys like Mascari and Sturts playing 40-plus minutes, it is going to really wear them down come March, I think. I mean, sometimes you get players that are just built for it, but it is rare. So I'm really interested in the rotations that McCollum works with. And then if Drake wins that one against Evansville, it really sets up for an interesting next 2 games, because they take on a 10-win Illinois State team, and then they go on the road to take on Indiana State, which it's always tough to play Indiana State. They're one of the best teams in the Valley, despite losing their head coach and their best player. They're very similar to Drake in that fashion. And I think those 2 games, it's going to really show where Drake is sitting in the Valley, because now, you got to be able to play with some consistency, and that's been an issue for the Drake Bulldogs. So Drake takes on Evansville tomorrow at 5 o'clock at the Knapp Center. I will be there, so make sure to follow along at Media Row Pod, as well as me on Twitter, Justin_C Miller. I will be giving my thoughts as well as coaches' interviews afterwards. So really excited for that one. Sticking with the Drake Bulldogs and moving towards the football side of things, Joe Woodley. I was meaning to mention this earlier, but Joe Woodley gets his offensive coordinator position filled, as well as his quarterback coach. Former Iowa State quarterback Kyle Kempt is headed over to Des Moines to be the quarterback's coach and offensive coordinator. Kyle Kempt, of course, famous for being the walk-on under Campbell that took down Baker Mayfield in that elite top 3 Oklahoma squad on the road, beat them after overcoming a halftime deficit of 10-plus points. And Kyle, this is a good fit. I really believe that because he has experience of working with players like this, he was in their shoes, playing at a smaller school. He played at a community college before playing at Iowa State. He played over there at Hutchinson Community College, and he knows the small ball game. And so I think he can utilize that as a recruiting tactic, which is going to be really hard to recruit with Drake. And I'm really interested to see what Woodley and Kemp are able to do. But when you have a guy like Kyle Kempt, who had been in the players' shoes, went on to do great things, was a really terrific quarterbacks coordinator with Iowa State, where, he helped guys like Rocco Beck, Brock Purdy was in there as well. And so I think this is a really good fit. And he's just a great guy, too. Through my time at Iowa State, only met him a handful of times, and every time he seemed wonderful. He would answer all the questions the media would have for him and answer them with great detail, too, where he knows what he's talking about. And I think you just, with Joe Woodley and his experience, and then you put on top a player that took down a top 3 team, that played for community college and a JUCO, the recruiting benefits of that is huge for Drake, I think. And that's going to be one of the biggest concerns going into the season, because in NAIA, there's not really rules. Now you're going to a PFL league in the NCAA. You're going to Drake, which doesn't allow scholarships, full rides for football players. It's going to be a challenging few months to try to recruit here, but it sure helps to have a national champion and a player coach like Kyle Kempt. So love that hire. Really excited to see what happens come August with Woodley and this team. They're going to be pretty good. I don't think there's going to be a drop-off from what Coach Steps has left behind. So that is your Drake Bulldogs, Missouri Valley kind of overview heading into the weekend. Just kind of went through it real quick. Um, Make sure, again, I'll be at the Evansville game, so follow along for highlights, thoughts, as well as coach's interview at Media Row Pod, as well as Justin Miller on air on TikTok and Justin_C Miller on Twitter as well. Let's get to the college football playoffs. Let's get to the NFL because it is playoff weekend. Last night, starting there, a great start to these semifinals. You had Notre Dame going up against Penn State, a game that, I mean, it was going to, I said yesterday, it was going to come down to players making mistakes and can Notre Dame continue to get pressure on the quarterback, Drew Aller. He's getting a lot of hate on social media. He did not play well. Just as plain as that. Drew Aller, he finished 12 of 23, 135 yards, no touchdowns, and basically the game-sealing interception with about 30 seconds left. Gave the ball back to Notre Dame. They were able to run out the clock and kick that field goal. But on top of that, you had no receptions from the wide receivers for Notre Dame. No receptions from the wide receivers. One wide receiver got a jet sweep, and it went for -3 yards. I mean, Notre Dame just contained Aller and the weapons on the perimeter. They struggled against the run, which usually would be costly, but they continue to get pressure on Aller. And that interception, you have the center just completely get burned by a middle linebacker for the Fighting Irish, and that forces Aller to try to get that ball out quick. Aller in the post-game press conference, with the pressure in his face, talked about how there was nothing there, so he was trying to aim at the feet of the wide receiver and throw an incomplete pass, and then you reset for 2nd and 10. But it was just a great play by the Notre Dame elite secondary defense that is banged up. There's guys out for Notre Dame, and they're in the national championship. So Notre Dame wins the game 27-24. Penn State fans, are you ready to try to get a new head coach? And I'm not saying that because of what I'm wearing today of my Ohio State Buckeyes, but legitimately, 4-20 versus top 10 teams, 1-18 versus the top 5. Is it time for Franklin to go? He seems like a PR headache. He doesn't seem like I don't even know if Penn State fans really like him. And yes, you made it to the semifinals. And yes, you had 11 wins this year. But you lost all your biggest games. You lost to Ohio State at home. You lost to Oregon in the Big Ten title game. And you lost to Notre Dame in the semifinals. And yeah, you can go, well, they won 2 in the playoffs. Yeah, but SMU, Boise State, I mean, yeah, you won those games and you can't control who you play, but you're not winning the games that Penn State fans want you to win. You're not winning the games against Ohio State. You're not winning the games against Oregon. Teams with pulses, Franklin can't beat. Like I said, 4-20 versus the top 10, 1-18 versus the top 5. His last win, funny enough, was against Ohio State. When Ohio State was number 2, they had that block kick. Remember that? Ran it back in 2016. That's a long time ago. So long ago that Justin Bieber had 2 top 2 hits. Barack Obama was still in office. And there was only 7 Fast and Furious movies. That's how long ago it was. That's how long ago it was for James Franklin to actually beat a team with a pulse. And I'm not a big James Franklin fan. I think the way he's handled some of the off-the-field issues have been really poor. He strikes me as a coach that doesn't take responsibility. And then kudos to Marcus Freeman. During that press conference before the Orange Bowl, Franklin brings up his hairline, brings up his age, trying to be funny. And Marcus Freeman looked ready for battle and came out that way. Notre Dame, just really impressive. Riley Leonard continues to improve. The running game with Love is going to be really hard to stop for either Texas or Ohio State. Whichever team comes across Notre Dame it's going to be a battle. Last night, as an Ohio State fan, I was watching that game really cheering on Penn State because I think Notre Dame's going to cause more headaches. And I know people will go, yeah, but isn't it, ask Oregon, it's really hard to beat a team twice in the same year. I get that. But I think Penn State just doesn't have the depth that a team like Ohio State has. And so I was really hoping Penn State would win that game. And Notre Dame ends up taking it in the final seconds, 27-24. Marcus Freeman, he's so easy to cheer for. Ohio State trained him right. He could go up against his former team if they win against Texas tonight. And it should be a fun one. Whatever game it is, come January 20th, it should be a fun one. I'm so happy. Though, my biggest fear while I was cheering for Penn State to win that game, I was so nervous that then Ohio State would lose and we would get Texas versus Penn State, which would be an awful national title in my mind. I don't care for either team. I don't really care for either of the coaches. I'd watch it because I'm a sicko, but that's a matchup I would care less who won. Could both teams lose in my mind. But so Notre Dame advances, and we'll get to, towards the end of our show today, our thoughts on the Texas-Ohio State game. But before we do that, we have NFL wildcard happening this weekend. Like we said, this is a great 4-day stretch for football this season. This might be one of the greatest stretches of football ever, where you have college football playoffs and then you have wildcard games all weekend long. And some really close ones. We're just going to break down the Saturday ones. Starting with, you have Houston at the Chargers. Or you have the Chargers at Houston. I apologize. And this one, I think, just comes down to the battle in the trenches. Both teams are top 10 in sacks. And Houston, I really thought was going to play better. But you lose one of your top wide receivers. The running game has been okay. It's been good with Mixon. But just really thought Stroud would play a little bit better. Thought they would have been more consistent. And be able to compete with, the top dogs of the AFC against the Ravens on Christmas Day. That was brutal. Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry ran all over that team. And that's huge for the Chargers, a team that Harbaugh has tried to make more of a run-heavy team. It's going to be a fun quarterback matchup. I like the Texans. They're favored by 3 right now. And it may be just because they're the home team. But I like Stroud, and I've been a big Herbert fan. But from what I've watched this year, he just doesn't look 100%. And like I said, I know Houston has been inconsistent, but I like them at home in this playoff atmosphere to take down the Chargers. Chargers just better get pressure on him. Bosa on the edge, as well as Mack. You got to get those guys into the backfield if you're the Chargers. So I think it's going to just come down to defensive line and pressure on the quarterback. On Monday when we do the show, one of the first things I'll look at is that stat of quarterback pressure and sacks and yards lost. Which team won the battle in the trenches? That's going to be a close one, going to be a good one. But I like Houston in that game. To wrap up the NFL wild card on Saturday, you have Ravens and Steelers. That just feels right, doesn't it? To say Ravens versus Steelers in a playoff game. Those were some of my favorite moments growing up. I don't like either team, but when you had Flacco against Roethlisberger Palomalu versus Reed and Lewis. I mean, those were some great games. And I loved it when it was played in Pittsburgh and you'd get snow on the ground. And it was just a crazy atmosphere. This year it's in Baltimore because they've had an outstanding season. And you have a Steelers team that has just fallen off the rails. They've lost 4 straight. And they've looked bad. They have not looked good. You had Russell Wilson throw for 414 yards versus Cincinnati. And since then, he's just been non-existent. Under 200 yards passing in 3 of the last 5 games. 2 interceptions in those 5 games. He's taking sacks again. He's not moving out of the pocket. The Steelers, to his credit, though, the Steelers' offensive line has been horrific. The Steelers' wide receiver core without Pickens, I mean, he really has Najee Harris and Freiermuth to throw to. And that's what has happened for years with the Steelers. They've never had great wide receiver depth after the Antonio Brown and Juju Smith-Schuster years. And you just now have a offense that is putting a lot of pressure on a really good defense to hold now an MVP candidate like Lamar Jackson, Derrick Henry, who's a beast, and this talented Ravens team. You're asking a lot for your defense. Now, the defense for the Steelers do get catch their breath and catch a break because Zay Flowers will not play, according to Harbaugh. But this is going to be, I think, an ugly loss for the Steelers. Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry, that duo, when Derrick Henry announced he was going to the Ravens, I mean, it's not fair. How do you guard that option play? You have a quarterback that can hit up to 20 miles per hour running the ball. And then you have a running back that is built like a tank, but also elusive and athletic. How do you guard that? And that's why Lamar Jackson has over 5,000 yards and all-purpose yards. He has 45 total touchdowns, only 4 interceptions. He's not turning the ball over. I think the Ravens dominate, and it's an ugly loss for Russell Wilson and the Steelers. So that's my Saturday wildcard preview. Now, as we're running out of time here, to quickly go through the game of the day, you have Ohio State taking on Texas. Winner advances to the college football playoff. Ohio State, a 6-point favorite. Buckeyes cannot listen to the media. They have to tone out the noise. Everyone is saying how great they are. They have to play with the same mentality they had after they got embarrassed by Michigan. They have to play with that mentality because now I think going into the playoffs, there was pressure on Ryan Day. And other than that, though, they were the underdogs. It truly was Ohio against the world. But now it has flip-flopped to everyone saying how great this team is. Look at what they can do. Look at the weapons. They've had those weapons all season long. And they're great now, but this team has to play with the same mentality they have in the playoffs. But what the media is saying is true. This team is the best team that has performed in the college football playoffs. They're dominating Tennessee. They're dominating Oregon. And they're doing it by utilizing their star players. Kelly can't force anything. Kelly has to be aggressive and get the ball into the playmakers' hands downfield. Jeremiah Smith is the best wide receiver by far in the college football. In college football. Jeremiah Smith is the best wide receiver by far in college football. And he's a true freshman, and he's dominating these tough defenses of Tennessee, of Oregon. And you have to just continue to put the ball into your playmakers' hands, downfield, like I keep saying. Take the top off of the defenses. And then also what is getting ignored because of Ohio State's offensive abilities and their weapons and the way they're blowing out teams is how well this defensive line has played for Ohio State. Averaging 6 sacks in their 2 playoff games. They had 8 versus Oregon. And they're doing it without a lot of blitzes. They're just doing it with their basic 4-man front, and they're getting to the backfield, and that is crucial. You have to put pressure on Ewers, make him uncomfortable in the pocket. And you have two very similar teams. Teams that start of the year, everyone was really hyped on. Then they lose one of their biggest games of the regular season. Ohio State loses to Oregon, and you have Texas losing to Georgia at home. And then you see two teams that just kind of battled inconsistencies. Texas has a really strong defensive line. I think it's going to be really hard for Henderson and Judkins to move the ball. That's why Kelly can't force the run, has to take what the Texas defense gives him. But I don't know how you don't pick Ohio State tonight. A team that has just purely dominated throughout the playoffs. A team that has looked the absolute best in the playoffs. And it's funny because that is not what anyone saw coming after that bad loss against Michigan. But so give me Ohio State over Texas. The 6 points, I think it's going to be close. I could see it being a field goal again, like we saw last night. But 6 points to Ohio State, going to be a battle. These two teams match up really well, and I like the Buckeyes winning this one. So thank you again so much for tuning in to Media Row. You can follow us at Media Row Pod on Twitter, YouTube, as well as follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Justin_C Miller. Have a great weekend. Have a great football weekend. We'll be back Monday to recap everything. Drake men's basketball, Drake women's basketball, just MVC as a whole, as well as the top football stories. So everyone have a great and safe weekend.